Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our 37th episode of the Restaurant Dealmaker Show, where we discuss pertinent topics regarding the food and beverage industry with industry professionals. My guest co-host today is Bob House, the president of BizBuySell, who I've had the opportunity to work with over the past number of years as a former member of the BizBuySell Brokers Advisory Council from 2021 to 2023, as well as teaming up with their marketing head and participating in a marketing workshop at an International Association of Business Brokers conference in Denver a couple of years ago. Last week, I had the opportunity to participate on a podcast with Bob and with Juan Rest of the Deal Studio and Business Brokerage Press. And the title of the podcast was How an Expert Restaurant Broker Deals with Various Issues in Putting Together Restaurant Deals. Bob mentioned that restaurants represent the largest volume of businesses sold in BizBuySell, other than lumping together the entire service business category. The national statistics regarding restaurant sales that Bob quoted, which perhaps he'll share with us today, are very similar to the statistics we have experienced regarding sales prices relative to earnings and sales. However, in California, there are some distinguishable differences from some of the national restaurant sales statistics. For example, restaurant sales with the real estate being sold together is far less frequent in California than the rest of the country due to the high cost of real estate in California, with a small percentage of restaurant owners owning their building. Also, earnings of food and beverage businesses in California tend to be lower compared to many of the food and beverage businesses throughout much of the country, based upon my conversation with other restaurant brokers throughout the country, due to the extraordinary high operating costs in California, such as labor, product cost, insurance, utilities, and occupancy costs. Consequently, many of the large national chains and franchises don't have the same degree of concentration and number of units within the state as they do in other states, as their history of earnings are less in California than other places in the country. Additionally, many of the national chains are publicly held companies and have the added pressure of producing high earnings for their shareholders, which is not as likely with California locations. For a restaurant realty company, BizBuySell has been by far the most successful website, other than RRC's own website, for generating buyers for our food and beverage listings. Bob brings extensive leadership experience in product management and business development across various industries. Currently serving as president of Businesses for Sale at CoStar Group since September 2012, Bob has also held roles as general manager of BizBuySell and BizQuest and director of product management for BizBuySell. Prior to this, Bob was director of product management at Dun & Bradstreet, where oversight included the high-traffic allbusiness.com. Additional experience includes directing product management for multiple SaaS applications as Alabaster Solutions. I'm sure Bob will correct me on how I pronounce that. Thank you. And co-founding Adventure Network for Travelers, which achieved significant revenue growth. Bob's background also includes project management at Digit Design and hardware engineering at Olivetti. His education credentials include a BS in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from UCLA Anderson School of Management. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Bob House. And I'd like to begin by asking Bob the first question. Bob, how would you describe BizBuySell and the way it serves the small business market?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Steve. That was quite comprehensive. You went all the way back. Thank you.
Sure. Pleasure.
So BizBuySell, we're the leading marketplace here in the U.S. for small business, marketing of small business opportunities, both established businesses as well as franchises, established franchises, new franchises. And we're, as a two-sided marketplace, our role is to aggregate both the supply side with, from brokers and franchisors and business owners, and the demand side of entrepreneurs. And we do that through really strong SEO and digital marketing, and really kind of built this kind of two-sided marketplace. our mission is really to help all of our constituents transact business transfers. So that's kind of where we're focused on. That's our North Star metric. Are we helping people sell more businesses? And to do that, we provide lots of resources and content, to help folks navigate the process, whether that's article content, video content, valuation and benchmarking tools, guides to buying and selling. It's all found on our site because the process is involved, and also a very large broker directory to help people find an advisor to help them walk through this process. So that's BizBuySell in a nutshell. We have 4 million monthly visits to our network of sites, and so it's a very active and dynamic marketplace with lots of businesses being sold every month.
Yeah, and Bob, approximately on an average, how many businesses do you have for sale at any one time on BizBuySell?
There's approximately 45,000 that are active at any given time on the platform. They're constantly coming and going, and over the course of the year, it's 75,000 that come on and off the platform. As it takes a while to market a business, but businesses are added and removed from the platform constantly. So yeah, that's kind of the inventory.
I got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't think anybody comes close. They're not in your ballpark, that's for sure. They're in the mini leagues, not the majors like you are. Anyway, and it's been wonderful for us. So what was the career path that led you to join BizBuySell?
Well, luckily you covered a decent amount of that in your intro. But yeah, I have a career in small business in general. I've spent a lot of my career working in startups or software companies. As you mentioned, I had my own stint as an entrepreneur, starting a kind of a tour operator that we ran for a few years. So I have that kind of entrepreneurial owner kind of experience. But yeah, building these communities, and I was at a company called allbusiness.com that Dun& Bradstreet bought, and we partnered with BizBuySell to carry the listings on that site, and that's how I got to know BizBuySell, and ultimately led to my joining the company in 2012.
Oh, well, BizBuySell's been very fortunate to have you, I'm sure.
Thanks.
So
Yeah, and I'm familiar with BizBuySell going back to really probably 2007 or something. So quite a while.
when did BizBuySell actually start?
It started in the mid 90s, like 96, when everything was getting started on the web, and became a marketplace for everything being born. LoopNet was born around the same time. All the great promise of the web was like, okay, now there's this place where we can create online communities. And so yeah, it was the mid 90s for BizBuySell. We're coming up on our 30th anniversary next year.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. So what do you enjoy most about serving as president of BizBuySell?
I really love, I love two-sided marketplaces, and I love creating value for our stakeholders. And we have a lot of different stakeholders. We have to help owners reach their goals. We help buyers reach their dreams of business ownership. We help brokers and other professionals make a living on the platform. And I enjoy the challenge of, delivering value for all those people. And ultimately, again, like we see it in terms of the enterprise value transacted and reported to us on the platform. I enjoy that we're helping enable wealth transfer and the next generation of entrepreneurs to kind of take on businesses and bring them to their next chapter. So I find that very satisfying. And of course, working with a great team of passionate, professional, dedicated people who come to work every day to tackle that mission is really satisfying to me.
That's great. Well, I'm sure they enjoy working with someone of your caliber. I'm sure
Well,
that gives them
yeah,
a
we're
lot.
we're all of the same caliber here.
Yeah. Okay. That's a very nice thing to say, for sure. So what event or events have been most challenging in your career, and how have you dealt with these challenges?
This is a good question. I think the pandemic, honestly, was a big challenge for everybody, right? Particularly this category.
Yes.
Restaurants were decimated. So, and our business was impacted greatly because we have a lot of businesses that relied on that kind of customer interaction, and so, businesses, I mean, business sales really dropped. Everybody had to figure out, PPP and how to kind of navigate and operate in this new world for a period. So, our team did had to do the same thing. And you and I worked together at that time on developing some content, I believe, for helping people navigate kind of the uncharted waters of that period in 2020. So that was definitely a challenge, pivoting to remote work and pivoting to how are we going to help people get through this period so that they are confident in buying business restaurants again, and businesses in general are confident in you know having a profitable business operation. But it's interesting, with every kind of challenge, there's another. I mean, if you look at the impact of that era on restaurants in California, certainly a lot went out of business. But here in San Francisco, a lot of them expanded their footprints with these outdoor spaces that they were allowed to operate during that period, and have persisted to this day. So, for really good businesses that are, profitable, they've kind of expanded their capacity with additional seating. And that was because of the pandemic that has stuck around to this day, parklets and whatnot.
Yeah. The California Restaurant Association made a statement like 3 months into COVID, after COVID had begun, I guess February, and officially, I think it was March 2020. They said that 1/3 of all food and beverage businesses in California, and at that time, before COVID, they said there were 80,000 food and beverage businesses. They stated that 1/3 of those would go away.
Mm-hmm.
What is your thinking on that?
Uh, well, I mean, we saw it in our numbers, rate in terms of deals transacted. I'm trying to pull it up here quickly on my screen. You know, we had 2,200 reported restaurant sales on our platform in 2019, and that dropped to 1,300 and
Wow.
60 in 2020. So I don't know what percentage drop that is, but that does feel like a third at least.
Yeah, yeah,
So it,
definitely. Yeah, third.
yeah, you
It's
probably have better data on that, Steve, in terms of how many really went out of business and.
Yeah. Well, I know is that, we were averaging about 60 to 70 deals closing a year before COVID. And I think the year of COVID, we dropped to around 40.
Mhm.
So, you know, w- people said we were lucky to sell 40, because a lot of people thought, we wouldn't sell anything, but no, people still had to get out. I mean, these baby boomers, they've physically and mentally, they've had to go through the dot-com bust, they had to go through the Great Recession, and then they had to go through COVID, and then all the other, extenuating factors with increased insurance costs and occupancy costs and labor, and how hard it is to get labor has just exasperated their motivation to get out,
Mhm.
irrespective of whether there's a downturn or an upturn. They just physically and mentally. I mean, just to give you an example, I'm working on this project in Walnut Creek. I can discuss it because they just went public with it. And it was in the papers yesterday. The Walnut Creek Yacht Club, very talented chef owner. Kevin Weinberg started that business with his partner Ellen, and a very successful business. I mean, they're doing millions of dollars a year, and profitable and great location. And Walnut Creek is going through the wall, and he just physically and mentally had it. He's in his mid 60s, and he's closing the business. He made the announcement to his employees 2 days ago. A viable business doing $4 million plus in sales, because he just physically can't do it anymore. And I think that sort of attitude I've seen prevalent in a lot of these baby boomers, because the restaurant business is so physical and so emotional, and it's a shame. A lot of great
He's selling.
institutions.
He's going to sell it now as an ongoing concern with you.
Well, no, he's closing the doors on his 30th anniversary, or 20, yeah, close to the 30th anniversary on May 4th. And
Hmm.
he made that announcement to his employees and then to the public. And so he's also the landlord of the building. So We, you know, we're selling the assets in place. It's not a going concern, and we're not selling it as the Walnut Creek Yacht Club because he's made his mark there, and he wants to make sure that no succeeding person will screw it up,
I
uh,
see.
and or the business or the building. And
Hmm.
but these things I'm seeing these kind of scenarios, happen quite a bit, just because of all the pressures of dealing with the food business, the restaurant business. But
Sure.
anyway, next question: what are your strongest areas of expertise, and how do you use these expertise to overcome the major challenges of business?
That's a great question. I think that probably my skill set that I bring that's unique to the team here is, and when others are have it as well. But when you're running a two-sided marketplace, it's a constant balancing act. So we have to balance the needs again of many different parties who are using the platform, and sometimes their interests are at odds with each other. And so we are always thinking about the buyer experience and what's going to get buyers to more deeply engage and return to the site. We have to think about the supply side experience of our broker customers and what works for them. Similarly, we work with franchisors and finance partners. So there's our own business interests, right? So when you're running a two-sided marketplace, there's constant trade-offs that have to be made to serve the overall health of the marketplace. And I think that having built online communities multiple times in my career, that's kind of that's the area of expertise that I bring that I think has enabled us to really quadruple our buyer demand side of the marketplace since I've been here, and really help increase trust and hopefully speeding up the process for folks of buying and selling businesses. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I can hear that. Yeah, it's a delicate balance, keeping meeting the seller's expectations, and trying to mesh that with the buyer's needs, and what they feel is reasonable.
Yeah,
So
even just like feature wise, like what brokers will say, why don't you just do this? And it's like there's a good reason why we can't do that from the buy side, for example. Or buyers will say, well, why can't you give us this feature? Well, there's reasons that it may not make sense for some other constituents. So it's always a balancing act when
sure.
you're building a piece of software that's meant for this ecosystem of participants that works kind of for everybody.
Yeah, I mean the profile that you provide for the buyers is really just a general summary. It's not, you got to really, the buyer has to drill down and to really read between the lines, go through the financials, go through the lease, go through whatever entitlements that are unique to that business to really understand the total concept. It
Hmm.
just, it's a starting point, the profile.
Yep.
But it's just their method of sort of weeding out whether or not the basic parameters, the financial parameters, the sales, the revenue, the profit, and the lease terms, meet their criteria, and then that's just the beginning.
Yep.
And that's upon them to really do the deep dive and do the due
Yeah.
diligence. Yeah, no
The
question.
listing is there to be a teaser of the opportunity to kind of highlight the key attributes of the business opportunity and to incite interest to get that buyer to reach out and make contact with the seller. So
Yes,
it's not meant to provide everything.
it's not the closing document. Nope, that is for sure. That's just the beginning to get their appetite going, for sure.
Yep.
So,
Pardon me.
next question: of all the many accomplishments that you've achieved throughout your career, what single accomplishment is most meaningful to you?
Ah, boy. These are really deep questions. I'll answer it, and then maybe you can answer it too, Steve.
Okay, that's a good way of going. Okay, you want to go first?
I'm sure.
Okay.
I mean, this has been my most enjoyable career role, for sure by far, and it's great to have a great team here and help to again make an impact. At the end of the day, we're really happy to try to increase awareness and the value of buying a business versus starting one. Um, because the kind of the American dream is I'm going to start at the next big thing, and starting stuff is hard, and so we spend a lot of time talking about the benefits of uh, buying a business over starting something, or even going to work in a job which you can't sell your job when you go to leave. So we think we've had an impact there, and that's been satisfying in just like changing the psyche. I do see it in the marketplace where people now think, oh, buying a business is a viable route to be an entrepreneur. Um, so that's been very satisfying. And again, for me, at the end of the day, what's really satisfying in terms of accomplishments, what we've accomplished as a team here, in helping hundreds of thousands of businesses be sold as a result of our platform and our involvement in the marketplace. So that's real value, and that's very satisfying to me personally.
Yeah, and that's a nice segue for me to piggyback off of a similar response, which would be providing, the single, I think, greatest accomplishment for me is basically developing Restaurant Realty to provide this platform for providing opportunities for those people that want to sell or need to sell, and providing great opportunities for buyers that are so motivated to get involved in an ownership capacity in the industry. So basically matching buyers and sellers and seeing them become successful. That is really, I think, the underlying, I think, most meaningful part. I mean, I'll give you a specific example. We just closed escrow on this project in one of probably the worst locations in San Francisco, in the heart of the Tenderloin district, on the corner of O'Farrell and I can't remember the cross street, but it's been there for about 20 years. And it's a very challenging location, dealing with a lot of homeless people and a lot of drug addicts. In fact, the one time I walked into the restaurant, I had to, sort of gingerly walk around a few people that were sort of passed out near the front door. And the lady that we sold it to was the general manager of the restaurant for over 10 years. And her former partner died several years ago, and so she took over the reins of that restaurant, and never with the understanding that she was going to be the owner, because there was some split ownership between him, her partner, and some other people, and so the deal was ultimately sold through a receiver because there was a real conflict between ownership as far as who actually owned the thing. Bottom line, um, this young lady from Guatemala who came here when she was a young child ended up being the buyer of this restaurant, which does phenomenally well. It does millions of dollars in sales, irrespective of the location, and very profitable. And a lot of that success is a result of her uh, her 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 operating skills. And it's so wonderful in this country to see a lady able to buy something like this through an SBA loan and have a very successful and profitable operation, and came from nothing. So to me, that's the epitome of what's most meaningful to me, to see
Yeah.
somebody like that have that kind of opportunity.
You must see it all the time, Steve, and all the deals you've done over the years. You must have, I'm sure you have plenty of examples where maybe something's struggling and the new owner isn't able to really get it off the ground either. But I'm sure you have many, many examples of where an exiting owner, you've just kind of delivered the payday for them, and they're able to retire, which is usually the number one reason people, well, I don't know if it's the true in restaurants, but in general on our site, the number one reason people sell business is retirement. But they're able to kind of move on with this great outcome, and then this buyer who's got this great vision and optimism for the future is coming in, and you've probably, if you track it over time, as I know you do, you probably see great examples of huge successes there. That to me is what's very ultimately the most satisfying part about what we do, is
Yes.
that we're really creating great outcomes for two parties, and that's really really fun.
Yes, absolutely. without a question. Yeah, we just had another example. We sold this restaurant recently in Carmel, and we sold it to the seller. Uh, we sold it to the seller about 3 or 4 years ago, and for just a fraction of what he sold it for. Uh, he actually sold it for 3 times as much as he bought it for.
Hmm.
Amazing, just because we had meshed, found, the right, uh, he was the right buyer when we sold it to him and took it from one level, to, triple what it was doing, and consequently got triple the results as a result of his efforts, and exited in 3 years. Went from, a purchase of 300,000 to $1 million. Can you imagine that in three
Yeah,
years? Yeah, so that was a real win-win situation.
that's awesome.
But that's very meaningful when you see those kind of results, without a question.
Yeah.
So next question. What are the qualities of a good leader that you regularly practice?
Boy, another good question. Well, I think what we try to do here is I do try to foster a culture that embraces kind of the entrepreneurial spirit because we serve entrepreneurs. And so we're a pretty flat organization, and I encourage the team here to good ideas come from everywhere. They come from the frontline customer service rep to our sales professionals. And, if a good idea is a good idea, I encourage people to kind of grab it and run with it and try to make it happen. So, that's one thing that I think we've tried to create a culture around here is we're all in this together, and, how can we better help, create the best marketplace possible. And I think people feel that here. And again, I make an active effort to instill that ownership mentality, that business owner mentality. Like we all have a stake in BizBuySell.
For
Um,
sure.
the other thing I try to do is just hire good people and empower them. And
Yes.
that's when you do get good people, it's like get out of their way.
Yes.
So those are a couple of things that I think about from a leadership
And I
standpoint.
bet you have some good longevity as a result of that amongst your employee ranks.
We do. We have some people who've been here, a good amount of time, and we also have always new people joining. So it's a good mix, but we have some long tenured people because again, we're all kind of bought into the mission here. And, there's still a lot we can do to help folks. So we're still working on it.
That's great. Well, they're fortunate to have a leader like you at the helm with the expertise you have and the compassion you have for dealing with people. That's really important.
Thank you.
Sure. So next question, how would you summarize the current state of the business for sale market?
Well, this is a good conversation we can have. We're seeing a lot of activity here early in the year. We always do, right? The first quarter is always, high intent time where people get past the holidays and I'm going to buy my business. I'm going to sell my business. So we always have a seasonal surge, if you will, in the first quarter. And we're seeing that now as well. I think it's elevated a little bit more beyond the typical one. I think there's likely due to the could be correlated to the change in the administration, the federal government level.
Mm-hmm.
So people seem to be motivated to buy or sell. I mean, again, our demand side in the first quarter is at record levels, and we're seeing a lot of listings kind of come to market. So I think there's a lot of interest right now in
Oh, that's good.
marketing
That's
business.
great. Yeah. Do you think there's a longer time frame for buyers to pull the trigger, so to speak, because of the uncertainty in the economy right now?
Well, we won't know that for some time, where we can kind of look at time on market for listings and um,
Right.
learn from our insights. We do this quarterly insight report, which is, we're almost at the end of the quarter here. So I think I saw the survey go out today where we survey brokers and owners and buyers and then weave that together with the data that we have around market activity to kind of understand what's going on. So, we'll learn from that when that report comes out in a couple of weeks. If buyers are maybe being a little more cautious or are going to have a longer timeline, but I don't think we have that perspective just yet. It's too soon.
Yeah, I understand. Sure. Got it. So how have higher interest rates impacted transactions?
Um, so I'll answer that, and maybe you can. I mean, maybe we could talk together, like what
Sure.
you're seeing.
Hmm.
I mean, what we've seen is like as long as it might be there's a little bit tighter credit boxes sometimes that come into play, and I think this those are maybe happening now compared to other times in the past. Um, but deals need to happen. People need to exit their businesses, and people are looking for good opportunities and are looking to get into business. So irrespective of interest rates, we've seen us, pretty constant activity in the marketplace, and it just seems to be driven by the fact that people need to buy and sell businesses always. Um, so what it does, how it does happen affect things is that maybe more creative deal structures need to take place. There's more of an expectation from the buyers on seller financing being a component or a bigger component of the financing package. But
Hmm.
we don't see a tremendous slowdown. Um, but although I'm sure if rates were lower, we would see even more activity.
Yes, without a question. Yeah, what we're finding is that it's we do relatively a smaller percent of SBA funded deals than perhaps other types of businesses, maybe because of the risk factor and the high failure rate in independent, non-franchise, non-chain transactions. And so the SBA loans that we are doing, obviously with the bump of interest rates a couple points from where they were, 2 years ago, it makes it more difficult to pencil out. And so in some cases, they're not getting the 90% loan. They may be getting less than that. And the buyer just has to come up with more money. But to address your statement about seller financing, we don't see much seller financing in our niche, mainly because most sellers know that there is a high risk factor that the buyer is not going to succeed.
Hmm.
And they really don't want to be at risk for, being the bank, so to speak. And so consequently, their attitude is, well, I'll take less of a price and, I want all cash. So
Sure.
very rarely will we do a seller carryback loan. I did one recently in Alameda where we sold the building and the business together. But in that case, the collateral for the note, it was about a 50% cash down deal and 50% note. But the collateral, because the building was owned free and clear by the owner of the business, and we sold the building and the business to the same buyer, that the seller had no problem carrying a 50% note because it was secured by the building. So he had that collateral, plus the buyers had a very, very extensive track record of very successful operations and had, significant net worth. So the added security was a personal guarantee by the buyer, first note and deed of trust on the building. So that's an unusual situation. Again, going back to the opening statement that not many uh, restaurant owners own the real estate, but that was an exception to the rule. And that was very gratifying because I had sold that building. It was originally a French restaurant, and I sold it to the who were became the sellers who were originally the buyers. I sold it to them 22 years ago, and they converted it into a very successful German restaurant. And then I ultimately sold the building and the business last year, 22 years later, to a group of Koreans that are operating a very successful German restaurant. And yeah, it's not something. It's fascinating the situations that we have the opportunity to come across, in this business. It's very gratifying dealing with all these different individual situations.
Yeah. How would you summarize the state of, based on your question to me about the state of the business for sale market, how would you summarize the current state of the restaurant for sale market in California? I guess we would caveat that.
Yeah, well, this year is definitely it's starting out slower, but I've noticed if I track the last first quarter, I think traditionally, the first quarter is a little slower. People are sort of getting in the groove of things, and I guess it's sort of been compounded, I think, the slowness by the erratic nature of the stock market, the current government's position regarding tariffs, and some of the whole structure of the government, and so there's just a concern as to where the country is going. I think we all recognize that we'll long run will be fine. We're just going through some bumps. So to be more specific, a little slower, but I'm seeing some in just the
Now,
last week or two, some pickup, more listings, more offers. And so consequently, I think the rest of the year will be fine. Yeah,
yeah. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So next question. What businesses are the most popular in today's market?
Um, So, I mean, we actually publish in our insight report. If you Google BizBuySell insight report, you can go right to the data tables on that report that will show you kind of reported transactions for the full year 2024. And you can see where the volume of deals is happening. And again, there's a lot in restaurants. But I would say more broadly that people are attracted to profitable businesses. And it,
Yes.
it doesn't really matter necessarily the category. There's entrepreneurs looking for profitable businesses in every niche and industry. And if the business has got a good earnings profile and history, that it's likely to find a buyer of some kind. Um, with that said, again, in as it relates to this audience, restaurants and broadly, we've seen an uptick recently in some listing inventory on some of the Indian and Japanese and kind of some of the ethnic restaurants and cuisines. Cafes and bakeries are popular. Bars and breweries, those kind of things are always profitable and are always popular because of their margin profile relative to food service. And in fact, we have some reports on our site. If you Google like restaurant multiples, you'll probably land on a report that shows that what the multiples are for each of these different subtypes of restaurant or eating establishment business. Service businesses are always popular in our world because there's just so many and so many different flavors of them, and people they're transferable often, and people I don't know are just attracted to service businesses. Maybe less headaches in some ways than other types of businesses, but those are a few that are popular today.
Hmm. And as a follow-up to that question, are you seeing any interesting trends in terms of the individuals buying or selling a business in today's market? Just in general, not necessarily relating to the restaurant business, but just the general marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely just been a surge in interest in like business, business acquisition and entrepreneurship through acquisition. It's now being taught in some business schools as
Hmm.
a path to business ownership. Again, startups fail. I think you've quoted to me the stats in the restaurant space, and or as it relates to franchise versus non-franchise, and
Hmm.
the failure rates of startups are much higher than the failure rates of taking on an ongoing concern that has a profitable earnings history, right? You just have
Absolutely.
all the benefits of employees and customer base already and all the licenses and permits and all that stuff. So we are seeing more people realize that this is a viable path. So younger buyers are coming in and that want to work for themselves versus a company or starting something and are looking to buy something. There's search funds out there, and there's a new way. There's influencers out there who are telling this younger generation they can buy a business, and a lot of them are coming to the site and inquiring as a result. Um, I'd say we've seen also some private equity uh, move down market or look into certain niches. And do roll-ups, either location, expanding a geographic footprint or some kind of vertical integration, and so there are financial buyers out there as well.
Sure.
So more so than in the past where it was always the owner operator who would
Hmm.
look to buy a business. And certainly we have that profile still very prominent on the platform.
Yeah.
But you got strategic buyers too, companies that are looking to grow through buying. So the lines between buyer and seller are often blurred. Often the buyers are owners, and vice versa.
Yeah. Those are great opportunities that buyers have now with these different various methods of putting together, capital groups, because capital for the sole guys starting out a business, capital is so expensive and it requires so much capital that having the opportunity to have other sources of, capital formation to develop their dream is very helpful. Yeah, very helpful at all. So last question. What advice do you have for someone considering entering the market as a buyer or seller?
For buyers, I'd say, be open to categories maybe that you might not have initially considered. Because again, there are great businesses in all kinds of areas that, you might have an idea that you want to be focused on one kind of lifestyle or type of business, but have a broad view and look at the profit profiles of the businesses out there and their earnings histories. And I'd say look at a lot of businesses. Find a good broker to help you, see businesses in a lot of different areas, and that might suit your skill set and your interests. For sellers, it's always the same thing. They're usually, as you know, unprepared to sell, and something then forces them to sell, and they probably, as they get into it, realize, I wish I had started earlier. So, my advice to sellers would be, know your business value and the drivers of it, know the true market value. Get work on the drivers of that value. All the standard stuff. Extract yourself so the business can be sold as an ongoing concern, so that you're not vital to the day-to-day operations. Hire a management team or somebody who can run the business without you present, so that you can transfer that to a new owner. Get your financials in order, and again, have a 3 to 5 year horizon, ideally, in mind, so that you can maximize the value of that asset when you go to sell, because you've prepared for that.
Absolutely.
So,
and one thing I always say is don't wait until it's too late. Some sellers just, unfortunately, things happen, undesirable things happen to people. They get sick. They don't have the junior people underneath them. Most of the business dependent upon them, which is contrary to what you said. They should build a team so they aren't just, selling their own, you know, uh, expertise. And but unfortunately, in a lot of these restaurant deals, the restaurant's success is that owner. He's vital. He's the general manager, or the executive chef, and if something happens to him before he's planned properly to have an orderly transition, that can be very detrimental to his ability to maximize his value, for sure. So,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, and I'd say, for sellers too, like, make sure you have a good team of advisors in your camp and corner, a good CPA,
absolutely.
somebody like Steve who can help you navigate the market and
Thank you.
understand, the true value, the true market values. And owners tend to overvalue their business versus what the real market value is. And
Yes.
good advisors who are involved in the industry will be able to help greatly.
Yes, without a question. Yes, well said. Well, thank you. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, Bob, what is the best way for them to do that?
Me or BizBuySell?
Well, either you or
I
BizBuySell.
can be reached through, our website and if you go to our website and contact us, if you reach out, folks can, it'll certainly make its way to me if you say, hey, I saw Bob on Steve's webinar, and you can reach out that way, and the team will make sure I see it, and I'm happy to get back to folks.
Great. Thank you.
BizBuySell.com.
Okay. Thank you. BizBuySell.com.
Mhm.
So I want to thank you very much for this very informative presentation, and I want to wish you best wishes for continued success and continued wonderful skiing with your family. That's the most important thing.
Well, thank you,
Without it,
Steve.
yeah, for sure. Our future Dealmaker show co-hosts for 2025 include in April, Marianne Costello, the president of Skoma's Restaurant, one of the most popular seafood restaurants in the country, where she has been associated with for over 40 years. In May, we have a very interesting lady. Her name is Jess Ziff Cool. She's the chef owner of the Flea Street restaurant, founded over 4 decades ago by her, and has been a Silicon Valley favorite since 1980. And in June, we have Charles Chuck Frank, a partner in CAF Restaurant Services, who's a legend in the restaurant industry, having served roles as a range from director to chief financial officer to chief operating officer to president of numerous well-known restaurant companies the past 35 years. In fact, I had the opportunity of working with Chuck. He was the interim, um, uh, I don't know what his official title was, but he was in charge of Alioto's #9 restaurant, which we were trying to sell before COVID. And we had a deal going on because there was unfortunately a little bit of a rift going on in the family, and they brought Chuck in, and I worked with him directly. Very top-notch guy. He's one of the partners, was the partners in El Fornillo, in Poggio Restaurant, Daily Grill. Very well-known guy, very astute. He's a CPA as well. Anyway, he will be our co-host then. So anyway, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And if you want to get in touch with me, please email me at steve@restaurantrealty.com, or I can be reached toll free at 888-995-9701. Take care of yourself, take care of others, and thanks for joining us today. Have a good one.